of the things that you really need the most help with, I won't be able to help with, staffing shortages and how to have a more diverse workforce. We have the same problem here ourselves. So, but what I will talk a little bit about the I-9 process, some of the documents you might see that you're not used to if you're used to just hiring US citizens. Some of it might be stuff you already know, but I'll just go over it a little bit. So you can have an idea and then open it up for questions if you have them. I did prepare a little presentation. If I could have screen sharing ability. See if I can do this. Oh, there we go. Okay, so can folks see the blue screen? Great, okay. Okay, so you've got your basics. Who can legally work in the US? You have United States citizens, lawful permanent residents, asylees and refugees, and non-citizens authorized to work. And actually, I guess I didn't really introduce myself. I'm a managing partner at this law firm in Northampton, Massachusetts. So we're about an hour away from Vermont. And we work in all areas of immigration. That's all we do. So we work with asylees. We do some pro bono work in that area. We worked a lot with Afghanistanis. We also do business visas too. We work with large institutions, small businesses. We kind of do a mix of everything. So I'm not going to talk about everything today, but just so you know who we are, if anybody has follow-up questions afterwards that's sort of unrelated to this topic today, here we'll share my email address at the end and you're welcome to get in touch with us. Okay, so who are we looking at? US citizens is what you're used to. They show their passport, they start work, but you also have lawful permanent residents. That's sort of the step right before citizen. They have unfettered ability to work in the United States. They can travel. It's permanent. They could stay that way for their entire lives. They don't have to move on to citizenship. So it's important to recognize the difference between them and some of these other categories. We have asylees and refugees, which is sort of that next step. An asylee or refugee also is allowed to stay here pretty much permanently, and they are pretty unrestricted when it comes to work. But then you have people who require work cards. So some of the people are coming in from Afghanistan are on something called humanitarian parole, and they need work cards. And then you have people who are applying for asylum but don't have it yet, and they need work cards as well. So it's like understanding these different documents. This is the basics. As you know, the I-9, you have to complete section 2 within 3 business days of employment. You have to see the documents. They have to reasonably appear genuine. It's not on you to verify that these documents were really issued from a certain government, but if they look reasonably genuine, then you're covered. They shouldn't be presenting photocopies. They should only be presenting actual documents. There is at the moment the ability to use copies, but only for pure remote employees. So if you are hiring employees, as we're starting to do in California, Texas, places like that, you can still use copies. At least for now. It's supposed to expire in October, but they keep extending it. But that doesn't work for employees that are going to be on site. It sounds like most of your employees will be if you can find them. So this is the basic. You fill out section 1 on or before the first day of work. The employee fills it out and then they present a document. Now this is going to be a list A document or a list B and C document. A list A document is a document that on its own is enough to establish who somebody is and that they have the ability to work. So some documents, that's all you need, like a US passport. It's got your photo, it's got your name, it shows your status, you're all set. And then sometimes you need a combination of a B and a C. So one is an identity document and the other one shows your status in the US and your ability to work. You can make copies, you don't have to. If you keep copies of someone's documents, make sure you do it for everyone. So we don't make them because we don't want to have to remember to do it for everybody. So just make sure that you're consistent. These are some questions that we've had about I-9s in the past. Can you hire somebody without social security number if they've applied for it? They've showed you that they're work authorized. Yes, you can do that. It just makes it a little bit complicated for tax reporting purposes. So if somebody just doesn't have their card yet, but they do have a B and C document or a list A document, you can start them with employment. Sometimes people will present receipts like, oh, I've applied for this document. A receipt is not usually enough If you have lost your document or your document was stolen, destroyed, yes, then you can ask for replacement. In that case, they could show you a copy, say, I lost this document, I've applied for replacement. That's different. So they show you the receipt, and then they have to show you within 90 days that they've got it. But showing like, hey, I've applied for asylum is not enough. You have to actually get the work card in most cases. So there are some employment authorization cards where if it's expiring and they've filed for a timely extension, then they're automatically allowed to keep working. But this is specific to certain categories, and it's going to be hard to remember it. So you probably just have to look it up each time. And again, if you ever have a question, I'm always here if somebody wants to ask. So again, copies, you don't need to make them, just make sure you treat everybody the same. Expiration date. So sometimes you get a document and it has an expiration date on it. And you say, I don't really want to hire this person because it looks like their status is going to expire. I don't want to bring somebody in that's going to leave. So you cannot not hire somebody just because of their expiration date, but you can ask them if they're going to require sponsorship from you in the future. So there are some work authorization cards that will expire, but usually there's an eligibility to keep extending it. So if someone has applied for a green card, they have a work authorization card, it does have an expiration date, but they are going to be able to extend it. So you don't want to reject somebody just because there's an expiration date. But someone like that, if you say, well, will you need sponsorship from me in the future? They will say no, because they know that they can keep extending this card until they get the green card. So there's a difference there. You don't want to discriminate just because of somebody has a card that's expiring. So it doesn't matter if the Social Security card is not signed. That comes up sometimes. Sometimes the names are a little bit different. That's okay. If it looks like, okay, it's pretty much this person, maybe there's a middle initial, middle name, something's misspelled, that's fine. So the statuses that you're likely to see, here's the basic cards. The one in the middle top, this is the green card. So if you get a green card, occasionally you'll have a green card that has an expiration date of 2 years. Even if it does, you do not have to re-verify them. As soon as they've gotten this card in any form, you only have to I-9 them one time. To the right of that is a stamp that will say I-551. So sometimes someone is a green card holder, but they don't have the physical card for whatever reason. In that case, they can get a stamp from USCIS. I-551 means that they are a lawful permanent resident. So they basically mean the same thing, except that when it's just a stamp, then you do have to re-verify it at the end of its expiration. And over to the left, you'll have what you may see the most. This is the employment authorization card. You see in the sample, there's a category. The category here is C9. C9 means that this authorization card is for someone who applied for a green card, but the green card has not been approved yet. So, that's fine that you'll see different ones. You'll see C8. That's for people who have applied for asylum, but their asylum has not been approved yet. And this document is fine. You see this document has a photo, and it also has an expiration date on it. So if you see this, you don't have to worry about what category it is, C8, C9, or what did Megan say? You don't have to remember. As long as it's an employment authorization card, it's valid, and it's got their photo. So that's a list A document. If you see an expiration, you might ask, well, will you need sponsorship in the future? But again, you always want to try and keep all of your practices consistent. So if you ask that for anyone, you should ask it for everyone. And so if you're going to be working with foreign nationals, we suggest just making that a part of what you ask everybody. Will you need sponsorship in the future? Down below, you see 2 documents. They're actually the same document on the left. These are both I-94 cards. So there's some confusion. People think sometimes a visa in a passport is some sort of indication of status. It isn't. A visa and a passport is basically just like a stamp to get into the park. It lets you into the country, but it does nothing for you once you're here. The document that really matters is this document called an I-94. And most people who come in will get an I-94 saying this is what your status is. So for someone who has asylum, they will get an I-94 saying they have asylum. If they're admitted as a refugee, they'll have an I-94 saying that they're a refugee. So sometimes they'll present this I-94 document, and then because it doesn't have a photo, they have to present it with a photo document such as a passport. There's two different types of I-94s. The one in the middle is the paper one. They used to give it out all the time. You still see it from time to time, but now most people, when they come in, they get an electronic one that they have to look up. So this one on the left is more and more common these days. Green cards, if you see those, again, that's a list A document. You might see a 2-year expiration date. You might see a 10-year. You don't have to re-verify it no matter what. It's just that stamp that you have to re-verify. So we've been talking a lot about the new people in your community, these refugees. You're likely to see a few different kinds of status here, so these are the ones to look out for. First of all, down below on the right is humanitarian parole. So a lot of the people from Afghanistan in particular are being paroled into the country. They came in, they were on US military bases, and they got this parole. And it's usually for a couple of years. Most I've seen have been either for ending this year or next summer. So they are not eligible to work until they get a work card. So just because they have this I-94 saying they're paroled, it's not an eligible work status. So they have to take that next step and get the card. And the card will have an expiration date, and you'll have to watch out for that and make sure you re-verify when that expiration date is reached. Many of them will then go on to apply for asylum. So you may have a number of them that are no longer using their employment authorization card for parole. Now they're using it based on their pending asylum application. So that is a different category, but it's essentially the same card. It's an employment authorization card. It will have an expiration date. They have to keep renewing it. Now, one difference between these two is actually asylum pending is one of the categories that gets auto extension. So if their expiration date is coming up and you say, okay, it's coming up in my system that I need to re-verify you, then they can say, well, I filed my extension, but it hasn't been approved yet. Now, for this particular category, that's okay. They can keep working. Now, as of May or April, they can keep working for another 540 days waiting for the decision, which is nice. And then you have asylees and refugees. They're the next step along in the process. Asylees have gone through the process. They've applied for asylum. Now they have asylum, and they do not need to be re-verified. So what they will get when they win their asylum case is they'll get an I-94 from the government that says they are asylees. Now, they're also allowed to apply for EADs. That's the employment authorization document, and they often do. So sometimes they'll present to you this list A asylum EAD, but the truth is their status doesn't really expire. So if you get that, you can ask to re-verify, but I've had several clients where they'll come to me, they didn't file the renewal, but they really don't need to. And I've had to explain to the employer, well, actually, you don't need to re-verify them. Instead of the EAD, they should have given you their passport and their I-94 so that you would know that they're asylees and you don't have to re-verify. It's the same thing with refugees. The main difference between a refugee and an asylee is that asylees apply for it in the US after coming in on a different status, and they're kind of going through the stages of the process. A refugee has already been admitted in that final status. So that means that they went through all that processing probably at a refugee camp abroad. So they went through all that. They've already been processed and screened, and they've been admitted to the US in this final status. And again, that will be on their I-94. They'll show something like a passport and the I-94. If it says they're a refugee, they're all set. So I know it's a little confusing, but these are the 4 that you're likely to see. And sometimes until you get used to these documentations, you might have to dig a little bit, do a little Googling. There's a lot of great stuff on the USCIS website to help you out with this. So again, I mentioned this, some categories, if you file a timely extension, you can keep working. It used to be 180 days while you're waiting for the extension. And now just a few months ago, they changed it to 540 days, which is nice. So these are the main ones you'll see this for are people who have an EAD card because they're applying for asylum or because they're applying for a green card. That's category C8 and C9. But again, I would not assume you're going to remember any of this. If you just remember enough to think, there are some categories that have automatic extension. I remember that. And then you look it up. That's really all I'm hoping you'll get out of it today. Occasionally, you might see F1 students. I don't think so yet, but a lot of these refugees are coming into the country and they're starting to enroll in programs, and you might start to see this over time because a lot of them are going into this. And I've seen some people from Afghanistan coming in directly as F1 students, even though they're then applying for asylum after. So this is kind of unique. For F1 students, they have an I-94 that says DS, which means duration of status. And then you also need a document from their school called an I-20 that says that they're authorized to work for you. So it doesn't come up very often, but they have a document like this that is, and usually this is because they finished a school program and they're given like a year to work in the United States for anyone that they want. And for this, you're going to see this document from the school, you'll see the I-94, and you'll see like a photo ID like their passport. So again, if that comes up, all you really need to remember from today is that it's a little unusual and that the documents are going to look a little different than what you're used to. And again, if you can ask a question if you're not sure. So again, re-verification, you don't want to re-verify passports or green cards or identity documents. For the green card, it's just if they have that stamp, you do need to watch the expiration. And those List C documents usually have an expiration date, and some of the List A ones, like the employment authorization document. So storage, you have to keep your I-9s current, find a good system. A lot of companies, their problem is they really don't have a good system. If they don't hire a lot of foreign nationals, then they're not used to this re-verification process. So if you're starting to get a workforce that's looking a lot, you're starting to have a lot of documents that are not US passports, you have to have a good system in place to make sure that you remember to go back and re-verify. So it's easy with big companies, but if you're smaller, it's going to be harder to remember this, but it's really important. So your I-9s, you can store them electronically if you want. You don't have to keep them in a paper file anymore, even microfilm. I don't think anyone uses that anymore, but and you just have to have the forms somewhere where they can be presented within 3 days of inspection. Okay, and you just need to keep them from 3 years from the date of hire or 1 year after termination, whatever is later. So now we get into what do you have to be careful about? You're walking a fine line when you're hiring foreign nationals because you don't want to follow the rules on either side. You don't want to hire somebody who doesn't have documentation, but you also don't want to discriminate. And there's a lot of conduct prohibited on both sides. So you don't want to hire somebody who's undocumented if you know that they are not authorized to work. So that is the key. And once you realize that they have become unauthorized, like for example, you have their employment authorization document and it expired and you know they have not filed for a renewal. Now you are knowingly hiring them without permission. And hiring anybody without keeping records, if you don't do your I-9 quickly, if you forget to do it for 3 months and then go back and pay back wages, this is all problematic. But you also want to be careful not to discriminate and treat everybody the same. Just a little more on that. The best way to figure out if someone needs sponsorship is just to ask, make that, like I said, make that a part of your questioning every time. Do you require sponsorship? Will you ever require sponsorship? And that should cover you, because it is okay to not hire somebody who will only be able to stay with you for 6 months. That makes sense. You can also confirm that they're able to communicate in English, but that has to be something that's really required for your job. And sometimes it comes up like, well, are they allowed to all speak Spanish or speak Dari on the job? When maybe it makes some of your workers uncomfortable, especially if some of your employees are not used to working with foreign nationals. If they're always hearing this other language on the job, they're like, well, can they do that? Can we tell them not to do that? You should not be controlling what language they speak unless speaking English is actually essential to your business, either for efficiency or customer service, something like that. So be careful about that. But, often it is a requirement of the job, so you can ask that. What you don't want to do, first of all, you cannot express a preference for a certain List A, B, or C document. You can't say, well, I would love to see a passport, or I'd rather see a green card, or I'd rather see this or that. Whatever they present, if it's valid, you have to go with that document. So one thing you want to be careful about too is how you do your recruiting. And this is really stressful. This is where I find it stressful for my company, because what you want, and I hear many of you do, you want to target certain ethnic groups because you want to bring them in and you want to reach out to this community. I would just say be careful about doing it. You can decide how you want to walk that line, but you don't want to target certain ethnic groups even if you're trying to diversify your workforce, because it could still be seen as a form of discrimination. So if you advertise in one kind of place, make sure your advertisements are broad enough to catch a lot of people. You may catch some immigrants by word of mouth, but just make sure, however you're doing it, like, am I treating every race the same, or am I expressing a preference for this one particular ethnic group? And you want to avoid asking questions about that as well when you're doing your recruiting and interviewing. So again, you'll see it usually when, you'll see it, if you see a passport, you'll say, okay, this person's from Afghanistan, but don't be trying to seek them out just because it's a community that you'd really like to help. Hopefully that you'll engage in recruitment efforts that will be broad enough, that it will be welcoming, and then it will reach that community in a really big way, but make sure it's open to reaching other communities too. So just keep in mind, for employment, we're talking about, not violating employment rules. If you hire anyone to perform services or labor in exchange for any remuneration or other payment, that's considered employment. So by the Department of Homeland Security. So if you are giving them food or lodging or anything like that, and they're working for you, you should be thinking about this and making sure that they do have work authorization. It doesn't include independent contractors. So you have some people that will own their own business, and then that business will come in and you're kind of not sure. I don't know if everyone in that business is authorized to be here, but that's not on you. You're not required to inspect documents for independent contractors. But as you've probably gotten into this, like if you're hiring individual people to work at your job and they're individuals, you're not hiring like a sub company. Are they really contractors, or are they really employees? And so there's a lot of rules around that. So just be careful, and not just like state rules and federal rules. So make sure you're not bringing someone as a contractor when they really should be an employee and they should be inspected. So that is basically it that I wanted to share. Does anyone have any questions? I wish I could help find you the workers that you want. But
we'll talk about that next. Yeah.
I mean, being able to go remote and finding ways to facilitate that. I mean, we can't do it on everything, but that's been huge for our ability to branch out. But there are a lot of new Americans, a lot of new foreign nationals coming in, and it's really a great opportunity to bring them in and sort of expand our workforce in that way. And I think it's great that everyone's showing up here today because they want to do that, and they want to really take advantage of that community and bring them in. And I think it's wonderful.
Great. Well, if there aren't any questions right now, Megan, can you put your email in the chat, and I'll Ibrahim,
sure.
sorry.
Yes.
Any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Ibrahim.
Alex, I have one short question from Megan. So once we receive an asylee status, the I-94 will be updated?
Yes. So basically, when you receive asylee status, that's either going to be through the USCIS at the asylum office, which will usually be in Boston, or it will be in front of an immigration judge. And either way, afterwards, USCIS is going to process an I-94. So that individual will get a new document. So in fact, the employment authorization document that they had would technically become invalid because they're no longer an asylee pending. Now they actually have asylee status. But it can be a little awkward because USCIS is not always the most helpful bureaucracy. So especially if it's a court hearing, it may take them several weeks to get that appointment with USCIS for them to process the I-94. Many of them go through that process and then think they need this employment authorization document. And that's also a mistake a lot of employers make, which is like, well, I can't do anything. You don't have that card, because it's much easier to read that card than to look at I-94s. There's a million kinds of I-94s. What does this mean? But yes, they'll have this I-94. It should say asylum. And then with their passport, that should be enough. They're eligible for an EAD, but they don't need it.
Yeah, thanks. Yep. Yeah, thank you. And I'll touch on this a little bit later, but, as the way our programs are working, as an employer, you'll never be referred someone who isn't eligible to work, in a reasonable time frame. If you're saying going to hire them in 3 years, a lot can happen around, the legal process in 3 years. But when we're talking in the short term now, you'll never be referred someone who isn't currently authorized to work. And so, and of course, these individuals will have support, legal support as they go through their processes. So there shouldn't be any surprises on the expiration of a work permit. That is something that we are working to ensure the employees themselves are, taking the initiative on and follow up with the employers on. So this is all really important information, especially in terms of onboarding and understanding the documents coming in. But you and your teams are not alone with understanding what it is and the verification processes and the changes in status. Ideally, we see a change in status in our community. And so while it may be a difficult thing for your HR folks in the short term, as it happens, you need to do it fewer and fewer times. As folks' status become more and more permanent, you don't need to worry. Did I just train this employee and I'm going to lose them in 2 years because of a change in status? That is a goal we want to avoid for everyone. It's a long-term retention. Thanks, Matt.
I would just piggyback on that a little bit. Yeah, the trend, particularly with the Afghanistan community, is what we're seeing as a lot of them arriving on advanced parole, then applying for their asylum application, then getting asylum status. And then usually after a year, they can apply for a green card. So they'll probably go through all of these. They'll start with the employment authorization document, then they'll have a different employment authorization document as they're working on their case. Then they'll have a new status asylee where you don't have to re-verify them. Then they'll have a green card. You may not even, well, they really should be presenting that to you, but you don't have to ask for it if you already have them as an asylee. And then eventually they'll move on to citizenship. But I will say this sounds amazing that you'll never be referred somebody that doesn't already have their status. But just make sure that even though they're setting you up for that and you can trust that, make sure that your HR also knows how to look at these documents too, because it doesn't take away your own liability as an employer.
Great. Thank you. Any last questions on this topic? And then I'll give just a quick second. And then we'll transition to, once the paperwork is done and some of that before and after to the next section. So again, thank you so much, Megan. If folks have questions, they can reach out directly.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll take off. It was really nice to meet all of you, and excited about the future, and feel free to get in touch if you ever want to.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I'm gonna blaze through part of my presentation, of course, because I was late. But a lot of this work is part of an initiative that the BDCC and Bennington County Regional Commission are partners on with many other organizations in our counties, called the Working Communities Project. There's 8 communities across Vermont who have been funded by the Boston Federal Reserve Bank to support systems-wide change in their communities. As a workforce development professional, and as the BDCC has been focused on workforce development along with BCRC for quite some time. We all know the struggles there. That was our transformative idea was furthering the size and quality of the workforce by supporting immigration in general. And so this is really the model that we are really hoping to implement, and as a means to bringing more employees to employers. There are many other reasons why supporting immigrants are good for the community, good for the economy, the right thing to do. But to be clear, this was initiated on our end, and this is very much about finding you folks, the workers that you've been looking for, as we can find them. This is a background history of the initiative. Happy to share more for folks who are interested later. But these are the big buckets of this initiative have been supporting current Vermonters, the ones who are already here. We have high school career programs, young professionals groups. Matt dropped the Stay to Stay program in. There's a lot happening with the folks who are already here, which is great. We also acknowledge it's not enough to fill our jobs. And so in doing research, we really identified that Southern Vermont doesn't have the same levels of immigration that you would expect in other rural communities. And so that's really why we're approaching this. And through the course of this work, we were partnered with the Ethiopian Community Development Council, ECDC. They're the refugee organization who opened an office in Brattleboro. Here's a picture of the ribbon cutting that happened last October. And so now there is an established refugee resettlement organization based in Brattleboro, who certainly hopes to expand into Bennington County in the near future. And there are some families already in Bennington. Megan did a great job addressing all of this. I won't go any deeper, but it is not up to you to understand the difference between an asylee, a parolee, and a refugee. As an employer, the only thing you should be worrying about are those expiration dates on the work permit. And that's the only differentiation that, do you need to check back in about someone reapplying for their work permit? Again, you'll never be referred a candidate who isn't fully authorized to work, by the time of a reasonable hire. So when I first did this presentation in January, I had based it off of interviews with employers in Chittenden County, because we haven't had refugee resettlement done in Windham County. So what's exciting is, we're updating it with our own experiences, having done this work, having employed, I think, 80% of the refugees who have come in the last year who are looking for work. So, it's been both incredibly successful and difficult, and we've learned a lot. And so part of our goal now is how do we replicate this and support employers and job seekers in Bennington County, as well as we have at the first launch and arrival of the refugee office. And this stuff, it is as straightforward as it seems often. If you come into this work with good intention and really looking to understand where folks are coming from and find a good fit, these things will probably come naturally to you as an HR professional. That said, we're here to help. Just some roles and partners that we'll go over really quickly. So ECDC, lots of acronyms. Sorry, it's the nonprofit world we live in. So the Ethiopian Community Development Council. Despite their name, they resettle refugees and Afghan parolees now from all across the world. There are 9 agencies in the entire country who do refugee resettlement. ECDC is one of them, and they opened a local office here in Brattleboro. The USCRI, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, is the national organization that has an office in Chittenden County. They do all of the usual case management, the initial reception, and Ibrahim, who will speak in just a bit, is their employment services intake coordinator, and he'll explain what that looks like. There's the Community Asylum Seekers Project, and this is an organization that works with folks who have come to the United States seeking asylum. Again, it's a slightly different status, and these folks are from Latin America, East and West Africa, the Caribbean, and Dora is their case manager, who you would work with in hiring these folks. And lastly, the BDCC, our organization, we liaise between employers and the organizations, as well as employers and additional resources in the community that help you retain and recruit your workers. And Amir, who's our workforce project manager, will talk about that in just a sec. This is the same slide with a picture. ECDC and CASP are co-located. And so again, this is, while they're distinct organizations and folks have different backgrounds, the goal of our work is so that it doesn't matter where someone's coming from, that we know how best to support these new Vermonters, regardless of their background. Great. So next, I'll pass it over to Ibrahim to just share about, how do we learn about who's coming and the kind of work they're interested in.
Thank you so much, Alex. Well, we here at ECDC, we have a database that has been connected with IOM. When a new arrival is scheduled to come here to Vermont, we will receive a notification that you will have a new arrival on that specific date. So we will plan the logistics and the accommodations and meal and food, and we will go and pick up that new arrival. Basically, with the support of SIT World Learning, we will, they have they will provide accommodation for a short-term shelter, and then once the new arrival will arrive there, they will be assigned to the new case managers here at ECDC, and we will start doing the paperwork for our new Vermonters. So a part of this paperwork is to help them finding jobs and connecting them with BDCC and other employers. The first step that we take is that we will go and talk with them and like try to make connection and just sharing welcoming them, sharing our experience as an Afghan who have arrived here a few months earlier. And then we have an intake form that we will receive the basic information about their education, about their work experience in Afghanistan. We will explore about their skills, if they have any specific skills, about their language ability. We will seek about if they are looking to change their careers here in the United States. During this intake, we will work with them to know about their short-term and long-term self-sufficiency plan, that if they are looking to have a driving license, if they would like to continue and pursue their education, or if they would like to learn something, a new trade or something. At the same time, we, in a collaboration with ECDC, BDCC, and Department of Labor, we will enroll the new arrivals with the Department of with the project within the Department of Labor. We will review their CVs. If they don't have any CV or resume, we will assist them and help them to draft one. And then once we collect all this information, we will pass it to BDCC. And then here Amir and Alex and others come, and they will and we will all together take care of them. Thank you. Okay.
Alex, I think you're muted.
Yes, sorry. So I think Ibrahim did a great job of explaining how we get to learn who is here. And, I think what partnership is always what powers success, I'll say. And so this interface between ECDC and BDCC, and for some of you, BCRC, this is really where I think the rubber meets the road. And so Amir will share a little bit about the employer side of things and how you can prepare and start recruiting and engaging with these folks.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to introduce myself because I didn't have a chance to. My name is Amir, and I came to Vermont from Afghanistan in January and start working with BDCC as a workforce project manager since February. So what we are doing after receiving the intake forms from ECDC, we are sharing some job postings or any openings that we have through the BDCC network with the applicants. And of course, we are, as a BDCC, we are attending some job fairs as well to identify if there is any other openings in the region. So we are kind of offering these opportunities with the new Americans. So the goal is to engage, or we can say just that to do the sustainable integration and engagement for the new Americans to the workforce. And then as soon as we are receiving any job openings from the employers, so we are scheduling any site visits to the facilities, and we are taking these applicants to those companies. And we are, of course, collecting some documents, any required documents or any documents that employers thinks that we need to do the translation for the new applicants. We are collecting those documents and translating those documents for the applicants to be more understandable. Also, we do have some pre-employment trainings for new Americans to show them or to explain, and I can say how the American workforce environment looks like, and what types of industries we have in America, which types of requirements they are looking, and what to do to be hired by these industries and keep your job for a long time, or it could be forever. And yeah, we do these trainings and also with the support of ECDC. Again, we are providing some interpretation and translation for these new applicants when they are joining their new jobs. Next slide, please.
So this is just a picture of some folks.
Yeah, attending the site visits or a company. So yeah, there you are doing. Also, we do have some follow-up trainings with the new Americans when they are hired by employers. We do have some post-employment trainings, and it's mostly about how to communicate effectively with your employers, how to ask for a leave, how to ask for a time off, how to just inform your employer when you need to schedule a doctor appointment, how to do the effective communication. And also in goal of making them independent in their transportation needs, we do have some education for the public transportation in Vermont. It's mover, of course. So we are educating new Americans how to use the mover, how is the schedule, how the schedule works. And beside that, we are helping them to get their driver's licenses. So through all the process, how to apply for that, how to pass the test, and how to do the road test. All through this process, we are providing the translation and interpretation services. We do have some new Americans who are well educated from their original country, from Afghanistan for now, who needs to evaluate their educational documents. So we as a BDCC are facilitating to do the credential evaluation. So we are just gathering their educational documents and start processing that, and in goal of helping them to just promote in their employment status, as well as if they have a long-term self-sufficiency to just continue their education here in the US. Also for those folks who are eligible and willing to do any other types of extra activities or working in their capacity, we are identifying some services available around here to the state or federal services departments. It could be VOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which is a program from Vermont Department of Labor, which provides the new Americans with any needs for their employment. It could be clothing, it could be boots, it could be anything related to, it could be a bicycle to just enable them to go to their workplaces. or it could be CCV, those who wants to just continue their education here, VSAC to just enable them to just apply for any financial aids, or Career Center. We do have some folks who needs to pursue their education or set of skills here. So we are facilitating this also to just identify or to let them know that we do have this services available here in Brattleboro or Vermont.
Great. Thank you so much, Amir. Let's see, folks on the job. So we touched on a few things, and I want to just kind of re-emphasize some of the most important things we've learned, and really how they're being done in our region. I will say effective communication is both one of the most challenging things to do, but also the most rewarding and important part of this relationship you're going to be building, not just with a potential employee, but with case managers and support organizations. This is an example of some of the resources to support English language learners. In Windham County, we have Vermont Adult Learning. In Bennington County, you have the Tutorial Center, a great resource. Google Translate is good in a pinch. And that said, interpreters are available, at no or low cost to you as an employer, as well as translating of documents. And so part of the reason why we encourage employers to collect all of the training materials. So let's say you want to hire 3 production assistants or production technicians. At any time, you can send those job descriptions, some standing operating procedures, maybe a short training document. You can have those be interpreted and translated, before you start that onboarding process. It's not something you want to catch yourself flat-footed on, but it is available at low or no cost. Same with the actual onboarding process. It's really important as an employer to understand, if I have a 3-month onboarding process, you probably won't have a full-time interpreter that entire time. And we'll talk about some of the best practices around onboarding and hiring. But really knowing under what parts of the training is literally every word important. And so OSHA, safety, the initial onboarding, the first week or 2 or a little bit is a time to think of, I'm going to want an interpreter. And so I need to be in touch with Ibrahim or Amir or someone providing those services in Bennington County to have that set up. Signage. This was taken in Chittenden County. Signage is helpful. It's cheap, relatively speaking. It's enduring. And I love this picture because it is clear that the lack of English proficiency is not an excuse for a lower quality product. And I think that's something that a number of organizations share and really want to ensure that communication is hard when everyone's speaking the same language sometimes. What are we sacrificing by working with a multilingual workforce? The answer shouldn't be anything. And that's the point, is that, with the proper signage, with a lot of thought into, quality and control, maybe that's when you have an interpreter come in also when you're going over that, to make sure that your business isn't impacted in a way that otherwise it wouldn't because of a language barrier. So the other thing I'll say is, balancing flexibility with equity, and in many ways they're one and the same. So something that we learned early on is that there are holidays celebrated in certain communities that the assumption is there's no work that day. The same way in the United States, regardless of what religion you practice, on Christmas Day, most people aren't expected to go into work. And so number one is, are we communicating effectively about these holidays coming up, is the first thing. The second is, looking at your policy is that, is it that important that it's Christmas holiday that is off, or would you be interested in like floating holidays so that employees are allowed to take their holidays on the days that are most meaningful to them? I know that, the policy in our office is, there's always a concern that if everyone takes the same day off when the office is open, all of a sudden you have an open office with no one there. And so that is where really connecting with your community is important. If you have 3 or 4 people who are all going to be out because of a holiday, that may impact your production line. And so knowing that they won't be there that day ahead of time could be really helpful. And that, allowing them to feel like they can take that time. And then maybe, and then they may be the people willing to pull a shift on Christmas, because they've used their holidays and other folks haven't. So I think it's that kind of flexibility that really builds equity. And it cuts both ways. If you're subsidizing certain folks to participate in extracurricular activities, whatever, religious practices, do that for everyone. And, the good example we heard was an office that both subsidized the celebrations for employees who maybe wanted to, break a fast at the work or do some sort of community and cultural event on the job site. They provided space for that, and they provided free hunting licenses for the folks who wanted to go hunting. And so, these benefits and this flexibility does not need to be in tension with the culture of Vermonters as we are more familiar with. That's why the flexibility is where we find equity in that. Another thing, and this I think is really important in how you think about hiring and keeping someone long-term, there's really 2 different models, and it's based on scale. So initially, and it depends on how many folks you're willing and able to hire. There's a cohort model, which is where you would try and hire as many folks as you could. In some ways, it could be 2, 3, 5 employees at once. And what that allows you to do is cut back any costs, both maybe that you may have or that the translators may have, and time and effort on that. Everyone can learn together and with one translator or interpreter. The other thing about cohort-based learning is that folks will learn together. So, often if you have 5 new employees, they all 5 have a different, slightly different command of the English language. So at any given time, one of those employees may be really understanding well and may be able to turn around and communicate more clearly to someone who speaks the same native language as them. So by developing this team, there's an internal learning community and support system as a part of that cohort model. That being said, there aren't many folks in Bennington County right now. And so for our Bennington County employers, I would really recommend a mentorship model. And that's really where you're finding an employee who would be comfortable supporting this person, and really pair them and try and have them shadow and create that, again, that safe learning environment with that, person doesn't need to speak a foreign language. Are they comfortable with Google Translate? And are they willing to laugh when there's a miscommunication, or feel trusted that, if they need to do something in an emergency or ensure that, that safety is being followed, that they feel comfortable communicating that. And so that mentorship model would be how you can onboard 1 or 2 individuals and ensure that they have everything they need. That person will say, oh, is someone to talk with their paycheck about, and I know that sounds kind of scary, but one of the big concerns that many folks had, they got their first paycheck and they said, what are all these taxes? What are all these withholdings? And sometimes just having someone who's from the American workplace to say that's normal, it happens to all of us. That is also a solidarity that they can build with the non-refugee or non-New Vermonter community in the workplace. Again, these are things you can be thinking about. And so when you reach out to Amir and Ibrahim, you say, okay, we want 1 or 2 people. We have a mentor who will bring them on the site tour. They'll work with the 3 of you, 4 of you will be a little team. And so that when and if there's a miscommunication, there are always miscommunications. And that's something that we learn and live through regularly. But, does this person feel comfortable calling Amir and say, this person didn't show up today, what happened? And then Amir can say, oh, it was Eid. And they didn't know they had to show up to work today. Next time they'll call you 2 weeks in advance when they need a time off. That's how this works for all of us. And it's how, again, we've successfully placed, I think, 80% of the job seekers who have arrived in the last year. Lastly, there is an income advance program available through some banking institutions to explore. If you Google income advance program, you'll see information about what that is. And essentially, and it's available to all folks. A lot of the United Ways offer something similar, and it's a way to offer small loans that aren't secured, essentially, instead of forwarding a paycheck or an income advance. It's a way to essentially escrow wages to repay one of these loans. Like a micro loan, someone has a flat tire and otherwise wouldn't be able to get to work and can't pay to show up. They would take out this little loan. The loan would be garnered by their wages, through their paychecks. And that one of the best parts is that it helps build credit and a relationship with local banking institutions, which is important also. So these are just little things that can be helpful. Again, none of these things you're expected to navigate on your own. In fact, none of it will work if you try and do it on your own. The only way we've really had success long-term with employees is really approaching it as a team and looking at all of this together. So again, signage is cheap. I'll reiterate that. And many of you already have workplaces where you communicate about your culture with signage already. You think of safety signage, bright yellow, bright red. Think about, is it worth being translated, interpreted? If it's workplace safety stuff, the Department of Labor, it will pay for that to be interpreted and translated. So if anything required, OSHA, VOSHA, that will be at no charge to you. Communicate your values internally as much as you do externally. I think often we talk about how good our products are and their value in the community, and share that with the folks who are working here, especially new Vermonters, so that they know, even though you might be making a little widget, that widget ends up in fly fishing reels, and these fly fishing reels are nationally known. And so even though sometimes you feel like you're just showing up to work and you're doing a thing, you are part of a quintessential Vermont product. And so many of you, that's what you're making and that's what you're doing. And so help build that pride in the workplace with someone who has no context of what, fly fishing may be, or, as an example. That's something. Make sure leadership is aware of these changes in the workplace, and that you do feel prepared to deal with the miscommunications and cultural misunderstandings. And if everyone's there with good intent and goodwill and trying to make it work, it's all surmountable. But it does really need to come from the top down, and the bottom up follows along with. I'll say that when the lumber yard hired 6 people, that was a top-down decision. They took the risk, if you will, and they made the jump and they hired folks on right away. But it was their employees, the ones also hauling lumber, who were driving folks to the bus, making sure they got home after and picked up. And so again, it really does take that village. That self-sufficiency plan, it takes time. And so in the short term, you're all working as a team to make it work. And again, we've seen it successful. 5 new employees means the people who have been working double shifts and overtime, they might get a break. you know, and so I think that is it can be that sense of excitement of bringing on new workers can be shared if you know the leadership is really involved. The last thing I'll say is in early September, and as attendees, you'll all receive this information again more formally. We are offering a free workplace equity and inclusion workshop. It's a 2-day workshop led by an organization called New Wave Equity. They've worked with the Vermont State Chamber of Commerce. They've worked with a lot of larger businesses in Chittenden County, and we've done one workplace training or a workplace training with them with Windham County employers. And so this is, again, an excellent resource if you're an HR professional and saying, look, well, to make this really work, I need to change some of our policies, or I need to rethink some of how we approach something, or where do I even start? This is a great training that you and your team can attend, again, at no charge, to kind of help you think through all of the steps. You know, what can we charge our marketing group with? What can we charge our HR team with? How can we support this being an organizational wide effort? And to make sure, again, I think what Megan said, we're not only focusing on Afghans, you know, because new and different folks are coming in through ECDC and also CASP. So how do we make sure that all ships are rising with the tide? That's really what I think this training is really great at. Looking at everything from the language you use in job postings to you know what policies you have on the books in terms of equity and inclusion. So that's a great training. I will send you all more information on that as well. Last thing I'll say is perfect is the enemy of good. The most successful employers and the ones who have retained the most employees are the ones who said, look, well, we don't have everything figured out, but let's start. And as we learn and as we make mistakes and as, you know, things happen, as long as we're all communicating effectively and we're all committed to learning and committed to making it work, and no one is just going to quit the moment things get sticky, that is the most important part. And so again, nothing will be perfect. None of your organizations will be by default the perfect employer of choice for new Vermonters, right? It's always about how are we striving to make it a place where folks who look different than myself would like to work. So that's what I have. Again, this will all be, this has been recorded. It'll be sent out to you as well. Would love to answer any questions. You know, Amir and Ibrahim may be the better folks to answer your questions, but yeah, I would just like to open it up to the group. Yeah, sure, Beth.
Hi, thank you very much for all the information. For me, it was very helpful. Amir and Ibrahim, I have a feeling I talked to one of you on the phone once with one of my employees. So I'm sorry, I don't remember which one. But I have this question. If Google Translate, first of all, does it translate in Dari?
It does. Yes,
They call it Persian. It's listed as Persian in Google Translate. But yes.
Okay, that was my problem. I guess I was looking for the wrong language. Also, is it ever possible for one or of you to actually come on site to help us do a orientation? I've had trouble giving my full orientation. It's a lot of verbiage, and I think it would help if I had someone like both of you for 2 hours. Is that possible?
Yes, I can come on Wednesday. I had an initial plan to come on Wednesday to Bennington.
This coming Wednesday?
Yes.
Wonderful.
If it is possible, please send me the document that you would like to review.
I will.
we will, at least I have something on my mind before the actual
Okay.
training. Then we will go step by step, and I can assist you with that, no problem.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Why don't we could email and take care of all of this without boring everyone else. So
Definitely,
if you
yeah.
could just put your email in the chat.
Thanks, Alex. I think Alex just put it there.
Okay.
All set.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Always.
you, Beth, and thank you. I mean, it in many ways is that easy to get support around this. I think often as employers, we feel like we're on our own, especially with regards to workforce development. You know, I'll say, you know, I used to run the career expos. We used to try and launch trainings. Like, we're aware of how difficult it has been to engage with not just new employees, but workforce development services in general. What's amazing and exciting is how with this community, how everything is kind of turned on around it. So for instance, getting folks enrolled in WIO and with Department of Labor has been an incredible partner because they are funding workplace equipment, bicycles. They're really providing those wraparound services for some highly skilled folks who really their only barrier may be a few small things relative to you know, the population who we've been recruiting from in the past. But again, I want to say that reaching out, you know, the best way to get resources is let us know what you need, and we'll, you know, find the partners here locally or in Bennington County to find it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jen.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't think that's too much detail for this group. I think people need to have concrete examples about that. So I think that's really helpful question and a chance to talk about that. We have the range of things that employers have asked for. We've had employers who didn't ask for anything. And then, you know, some months in when a bunch of issues had arisen because maybe we didn't engage enough, they didn't engage enough with us either. We did troubleshooting and we dealt with some things. We dealt with some identifying some key vocabulary words that really needed to be focused on in English language learning so that that person could do their job better and be more independent in their job. We have had some places that have leaned heavily on Amir and Ibrahim for lots of translation, lots of training, and other places where they've really been able to have like an embedded person with a lot of language skills. Oftentimes, if they're not available, we find another person. Right now, we have someone who's been training up in a very small company, just one person, and we've embedded a different person, a different refugee there who's doing online work right now and has availability and is doing in situ interpretation. And so there's a variety of ways we can solve for things. And you know, we just want to be responsive and creative and kind of help, you know, give you something that, you know, frankly, gets that person doing as much as they're capable of with you as quickly as possible. So there's no right or wrong request, and we'll be honest and direct about what we can, you know, handle. So it's really helpful for us to know what's needed, because this is also, you know, this is new, and then we're kind of developing programmatic plans based on what we're being asked for. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions, concerns? So again, you know, depending on where you are in Southern Vermont, either there's a lot of folks coming to your community or there's going to be a slow trickle. And this is iterative, you know, ECDC, the organization, isn't going anywhere, you know, and now is the long-term work we have to do to welcome these folks and keep them here long-term. And I think that's really our goal. We see what happens when folks decide to leave, right? You know, that's what we're dealing with now in many ways. And so now it's time to think, how do we keep these folks long term and see them as the people replacing all of the retirees we know are coming down the line. Great. So I'll share the meeting recording as well as the presentation with everyone. You'll see everyone's contact information there. You can reach out with more questions, and really appreciate everyone attending. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.